Thank you for attending the Microsoft Graph Community Call for March. We have 3 speakers this month. We were really striving to try and get external speakers in each of these calls to talk about what they do with the graph and what they've been focusing on with the graph and some of the challenges and pains they've had with the graph they can share, so you can learn from that as well, and obviously give us inside of the product team the feedback. So today we have a partner, Ajgrimar, from overseas that's going to talk, but we're going to first have Vincent Bray talking, and then Apitha from the identity side of the graph services team, both fairly new to the PM world. You might be familiar with Vincent from being inside of kind of the SPFX SharePointy world for a long, long time as well. So it's nice to have you on the inside, Vincent. I will let Vincent jump straight in to talk about his stuff because I am very cautious of time this week with this call.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm going to be talking about 2 things today. The first one, really quick, we are deprecating TLS 1.0 and 1.1 for change notifications subscriptions, aka webhooks, across the Microsoft Graph. What's changing? Well, starting May 15th, change notifications won't be delivered anymore over TLS 1.0 or 1.1. Why are we doing that? Well, a couple of months ago now, there was a few exploits that came out about TLS 1.0 and 1.1, allowing attackers to compromise the privacy and the integrity of the data over TLS. So the industry has been since then gradually moving over from TLS 1.0 and 1.1 to TLS 1.2. How do you know if it affects you? Well, first, the question you must ask yourselves is, are you using webhooks with Microsoft Graph today? And is your notification URL not supporting TLS 1.2? If this is the case, then you need to take action, and we'll see what actions you can take. If you say no to both of those questions, you don't need to do anything at this point. So instead of just pulling the plug May 15th and saying, hey, we're not delivering change notifications anymore over TLS 1.0 and 1.1, we are introducing a gradual rollout of this change. Starting February 17th, it was a couple of weeks ago, new subscriptions creations, so posts, must either upgrade to TLS 1.2 if you're not supporting it already, or include an additional property that I'll explain a little bit later on. The next change is March 16th. Post requests must now upgrade to TLS 1.2. There is no other choice. And patch requests must either, so renewing the subscriptions, existing subscriptions, must either upgrade to TLS 1.2 or include the additional property I'll be talking about just in a bit. Starting April 15th, patch requests must also upgrade to TLS 1.2. And lastly, May 15th, notifications over TLS 1.0 and 1.1 will not be delivered anymore. Your notification URL must support TLS 1.2 to keep receiving notifications. When I was talking about this new property, we are introducing a new property called latest supported TLS version. This property is optional and allows you to quote unquote buy more time, when earlier I was showing the calendar to say you must either implement TLS 1.2 or provide that new property. If you cannot support TLS 1.1 just yet, TLS 1.2 just yet, you can set up this property to v1.1 for some time, so you can keep creating and renewing subscriptions until we require you to upgrade to TLS 1.2. So this property allows you to buy more time on the subscriptions. So if you want to have more information about our plans and a detailed information about why are we deprecating TLS 1.0 and 1.1, what can you do, what are the different alternatives and things you need to do, you can go to aka.ms/msgraph webhooks TLS. The link displayed on the screen. And with that, if there are no other questions, I'll move to the second part. Let's jump right away to the demonstration. So here I'm going to be showing code about creating subscriptions. Usually when you create subscriptions in the Microsoft Graph, and I'm going to make it bigger, You create a new subscription object here. You say, hey, I want to be notified about updating or created or deleted objects and so on and so forth. And then you provide a resource path. All of that is works very well. However, there's a reason why strings in IDEs are often color-coded to red. This is because strings are usually error-prone. You can either mistype those. They are not validated at compile time, and that can lead to mistakes and code crashing in production, right? So you want to avoid as much as possible to have hard-coded strings. On top of that, it's not very obvious to know exactly what you need to put here. Should you include the version or not? What is the exact path you should put here? Should you include a trailing slash? It's not very obvious. Of course, all of that is detailed in the documentation, but that kind of pulls you out of your context. You have to go see the documentation and read up to understand what exactly that resource path is accepting here. So working with the Microsoft Graph Community Contribution Library, and I'll switch over to my browser for a second, I included a new extension method that I'm going to show you in a few seconds. This Microsoft Graph SDK.NET contrib library is a library that allows the community to augment the Microsoft Graph SDK, the .NET SDK, with new things that could be useful, that could save you time, and so on and so forth. The effort is led by Paul Shefflin and a few other community contributors. And of course, they do accept pull requests. And if you have ideas, you can also discuss that in the issues and so on and so forth. Now, what benefits do we get? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is here in dependencies, I'm going to add the Nugget package, which I already did before the call to save us time. And you can see that here in installed, I have this new library called graph.community. This is exactly what's here. I installed for this demonstration the 1.21.0-preview1. It's really important because right now the method I'm going to be showing you is still in preview, but it will be released as part of the 1.22 later during the next few weeks. Once I've done that, the next thing I'm going to show you here is what can I do with this. So instead of hard coding that path, I can use the Microsoft Graph SDK Fluent API plus that new method to get the resource subscription path for me. And so I don't have to hard code that path. So see here, I'm using my regular graph service client .users, typing in the user, and you could imagine that coming from a variable, coming from your code, and all other things like that. This is just for demo purposes here. .events, and then this is the new method we're talking about, GetResourceSubscriptionPath. So that is going to give you the exact same string I had earlier without requiring you to look in the docs or maybe exposing you to any kind of typing error or anything like that, right? So now if we debug that code, loading. We have breakpoints, we have everything. So we can see that I already started ngrok before, so we save time. I'm going to create my subscription here. Hopefully my breakpoint will break. There we go. So now if we look at the subscription object here, by doing Shift F9 in Visual Studio, we can see that that subscription object has resource path here that is automatically set. We did not have to hard code that resource path. It has been provided by this new extension method here, which takes advantage of the Fluent API of the Microsoft Graph SDK. So now I'm just going to go with F5 and remove that breakpoint. So that is going to create my new subscription. And just to show you it's actually working and I'm not cheating here, I'm going to create, I've subscribed, so in case you didn't see it, I subscribed to the events on this user's calendar. So any new or updated events will trigger a notification to be delivered. So here I am going to add a new event. And if we do that, hopefully very fairly soon, we should get a notification, which we just received. And if we look at the notification, we should get the information of this new event has been created. Here is the ID of the event. And now I could write some code to go get that event and do whatever I need to do with this processing to process that event. Let's do F5. So again, this handy little method from the Graph Community Contrib SDK will help you take advantage of the Fluent API to get the resource path when you create new subscriptions on the Microsoft Graph. And with that, if there are any other questions, I'll take questions and then I will hand it back to Jeremy.
Thanks, Vincent.
Thank you, Paul, for adding the URL of the repository in the chat.
Yeah, and so Paul's just saying if there are any gaps in the .NET SDK, feel free to create an issue. Daryl and the .NET team actually look at the contrib thing, and there's going to be like kind of a little bit of a journey as we kind of do the, like if it makes sense to pull it into the core library, we'll do it. Otherwise, it will stay in the contrib library. But if there are things that you're doing that you're adding to kind of decorate the current SDK, it'd be great to understand how you're doing that and to contribute back to that repo. So thanks for contributing, Vincent, and obviously thanks to Paul for driving that effort in that repo as well. So next up, we have Arpita to talk about all the deprecation plans and proposals we have. So I'm going to hand it straight to you, Arpita.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, Vincent. Hey, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Greetings, everyone. Hope you're all staying safe in the global epidemic worries that's happening right now. But my name is Arpita. I am a senior PM on the Graph Core Infrastructure Services team on the Azure side of the organization. Today, I'm going to present on a proposal for API evolution and versioning strategy within Microsoft Graph. This topic, I'm mostly hoping to get a lot of inputs and discussion going forward. This has been something that we've been showcasing with multiple forums, internal and external, for the past 1.5 to 2 months, receiving feedback and evolving as we go forward. But the key thing here is to understand how do we evolve Graph? And one of the challenges has always been, like, as you all know, Microsoft Graph has been there for almost 4 to 5 years, and our support policy states that we will introduce a new major version in Graph, and we'll have a close to 2 years of support post introduction of a new version, which will enable all our developers to have enough time to move into the next major version. All of this, great introduction. But we've also been hearing both from the products or the workloads underneath Graph, so-called workloads, which are necessarily the products underneath Graph, as to what is the next step that we do to make changes that enable our customers to get the right value for each of these products, for example, SharePoint Exchange. And at the same time, multiple developers have expressed their questions or concerns around, hey, how do we be prepared for what's going to change in Graph, like give us heads up and everything else. So this has been an ongoing conversation, and as you can see, the goal here is to make sure that we balance the application developer experience, that's your experience, with the agility of changing the product. We want to make sure that we provide you the best exposure and experience to the products underneath Graph, but at the same time ensure that you're getting the best developer experience. So the goal of this particular API evolution strategy is, how do we fix the things that are currently broken in Graph and evolve Graph and add new features, but at the same time, like I said, provide enough best developer experience to ensure that you have good heads up, good signaling, and at the same time, like, you're not caught by surprise if your applications are not working. But basically, we want to make sure that we walk hand in hand with you and make sure your timelines are aligned with, your release timelines are aligned with however we can support you. So that's the goal of this entire work and proposal. Some of the options we consider in terms of version, please feel free to stop me at any point in this conversation. With respect to the API strategy or versioning strategy, some of the major options we considered. Back in December, we, like a group of core Graph architects, met together and talked about versioning strategy that we should go forth with Graph. Some of the major options considered. One is the unified major version, which is something that is very familiar to the industry, going from V1 to V2, Vn to Vn+1. While that is very familiar to industry, like I speak to cons in the context of Graph, which is, as you all understand, Graph is a unified API for all of products underneath Microsoft ecosystem are underneath Graph. Meaning there's n different products, 50 to 60 different products that are all coming together to create this ecosystem of Graph and enabling or showcasing the relationship across these products. And hence it's a true graph with the user as the center, user or device as the center. So it's usually hard to coordinate among, and when I say API developers, the product teams which are feeding into Graph, the identity or SharePoint or Exchange or Intune devices. It's really hard to bring all of these API developers or the workload product teams to come together and align their timelines and have a hard deadline to make jump from one version to another version. And at the same time, it also impacts all developers, meaning whether or not you are using a specific API. Okay, let's move on to the next versioning strategy considered, which is per service or per product versioning, where we'll allow one of any of these workloads that are underneath Graph to have their own independent versioning. For example, SharePoint could use their independent versioning from Exchange independent versioning, and all of them will be served through the same endpoint as graph.microsoft.com. Yes, it provides a good independence to each of these businesses, making them move at the pace that their business is evolving, taking into consideration that the feedback that they're receiving about the product, etc. However, one of the key major selling points or major promises of Graph is that, hey, this is a singular ecosystem that you're seeing, and it establishes the relationships between these products, and it becomes really, really hard to track and understand. It starts showing the service silos, which defeats the purpose of Graph. Azure, if you ask who is doing it currently, Azure is doing currently, and primarily because of the architecture that Azure is built on right now. Meaning all the services underneath Azure have their own independent, they're not interdependent on each other. Like compute is not interdependent on storage in terms of finding relationships, similar to how Graph is doing. And in that sense, Graph is really unique and nothing like what majorly available in the industry right now. And the last option that we did some research into and looked into intently was this version-independent API evolution. And we'll dig more deep into what this is about, because this is the option that we have put forth to be considered and talking about as a proposal to go forward with. And this particular strategy, in terms of pros, it provides least impact to the application developer, meaning only those APIs that are impacted, or only those applications that are using the APIs that are impacted will be required to make any changes or make sure that they're not affected. But at the same time, it's also very flexible for product evolution and providing, like I said, very agile product value for the applications being developed. However, of course, it is hard to understand, and that's where we are looking at all the various strategies within the product to make it the most easiest way possible. But the primary thing here to know is this is not really an enterprise way, especially not Microsoft, something that Microsoft has done. However, good API companies out there that are very well acknowledged within the industry, like Snack and Facebook, have followed this method, and this is currently becoming a thing that application developers do understand. So those are some of the options we considered. And with respect to cadence, it's quite obvious as it's presented here. We looked at various cadence in terms of 3 to 5 years, quarterly, on-demand, hybrid, and landing on the second one, which is quarterly. Let's dig into more of what that means. So the version-independent API evolution strategy is the one that we are currently getting a lot of feedback on and people leaning towards, which means that for the APIs within Graph, we will publish the deprecation of the API elements in a quarterly fashion. That means each of these API elements, whichever has to be deprecated, will show up as deprecated in the schema. That means they're going to be removed at some point and still will be fully supported for the time period of the deprecation for that in queries and responses. And the two parallel tracks here to note is, one, the product will showcase the deprecation, and then communications will show. This is the major parallel track that I'm talking about, where it will make sure that all the required communication go out to the application developers. And there'll be a minimum deprecation period of 2 years. The parallel track of announcing communications is one of the key things that we are looking at. And a minimum support period of 2 years will still be taken care of with the gradual retirement while we monitor the telemetry. Again, the key thing here is to note that only those applications affected will need to react. All of this primarily, again, the key goals here is to make sure that the product evolution happens at a quick pace, independent of aligning each of the different workloads at the same time, and making sure that we fix the things that are currently broken in Graph and the communications primary aspect to be taken care of in a Vogue way. I'm skipping this slide because we talked about why we are going with this proposed strategy. And there's a question about, will there ever be a new version released for Graph from V1 to V2? And of course, the answer is yes. Even with this strategy, we will look at releasing a new endpoint for Graph, but then it doesn't have to be as frequent. I mean, it's going to be much less frequent. And there'll be strong reasons of major protocol changes that will affect all the payloads underneath the Graph. Could lead to a new version, but we're not foreseeing that to happen anytime soon in the future, because there'll be a path for each of these APIs to introduce the changes in a developer-friendly fashion within the same endpoint. The next two slides are the ones that are going to be major focus here, where for the application developer, here are the 4 cycles that are key for an application developer. API lifecycle is, as we look at these 4 stages, an API can be like, it's in a completely supported state, it's functional, all the apps are encouraged to use these APIs. When, if and ever something is decided to be like deprecated or changed, we'll mark the schema accordingly, and the developer experiences will then start showcasing, discouraging the use of that API element. And then we'll walk through what that looks like in the developer experience. And then as we go into the next phase after 2 to 2.5 to 2.5 years of this deprecated period, minimum support policy, we'll start looking into a gradual retirement with telemetry into consideration and whitelisting if required. And then once ensured there's zero usage of that deprecated element, we'll remove that and the API element will no longer be callable. So the app developer experience, here is the major slide which we talk about while we make the breaking changes. These are all the key elements of developer experience that we'll be looking at to make sure this goes as smooth as possible. One place is to look at the changelog. Like within the changelog URL, there'll be a section for breaking changes, which will be a follow-up of all the changes that are getting introduced as part of this API evolution. And when I say API evolution, addition of new things will of course be part of the changelog, but if at all there is something that's going to be removed or changed or renamed, that will also be called out, but that will be called with specific tags to ensure that we get the right attention from the developers. So there's a section for breaking changes with the right tags of whether it's deprecated or retired. And of course, one thing that we are looking into keenly is providing ability for developers to register for notifications on the deprecation changes. While changelog is one experience, the other key important developer experiences is SDK updates. So within the SDK for Graph, recompiling the applications will show compilation warnings for deprecated attributes. And that will happen again like over a period of 2 years, minimum period of 2 years, so to speak, because as you all may know, the support policy for Graph is 2 years, but at the same time, the products underneath Graph could have a different support policy promised to our customers. For example, SharePoint has much longer support period. So it will be based on independent product support policy. However, like a minimum of 2 years will be ensured for the product that is within Graph. So SDK updates, there'll be SDKs. I mean, whenever you recompile your application with the SDK, of course, there'll be compilation warnings for the deprecated attributes. And the Graph Explorer, there'll be changes within the Graph Explorer where if at all you're using any deprecated attribute, it'll start showcasing warnings as well as redirect you to the alternative. Responses for deprecation headers. We guide you to look for these deprecation headers. You will get notifications on what responses are throwing.
Okay, sorry. So I'm going to hop over now to our third presenter, and we'll come back to our Pitha and so give you guys time to think about the feedback a bit more. So our third presenter is actually a partner that's talking about how they've built using the Microsoft Graph a solution, Klynke.com. So do you want to introduce yourself and talk through what you've built and some of the learnings you've had there?
Yes, hello. My name is Ásgrímur, and I will introduce to you the service that we have built. And let me just share the screen here. We have created service on top of Office 365 that is meant to serve as a sole interface to the Office 365 via the graph. We have created a very common business case like case management, project management, and timesheet reporting that is built on top of the graph. So what we do is that we try to glue together all the main components of the Office 365. So this is the way we think of it. The service is using the graph to glue together SharePoint, Planner, Outlook conversation groups, and try to capture everything together in the way that we can make sure that we have a complete solution, so we can see all the cases, all the projects, and etc. Over the solution space. So what I want to give you a demonstration of is how we actually are managing the cases that are entering into the company, where we turn the group conversations into cases automatically using the Microsoft Graph service of webhooks, and then SignalR to actually present it to the users. If I go into the application, this is the main screen that you see. What we are looking at is really a SharePoint list that is hosting or working. We are using that as a database, you could see, with all the metadata. We have a case that has entered the company, and if we look at the case, we can see that there was an email coming into the system requesting if there was a position available, and with the CV attached. And we have then created some conversations like thank for and ask for the cover letter, and we have different communication between the team. So we find out that this application was quite good. We have a task associated with the case, and we can here jump directly into the planner task if we want to work on that one. As you can see, it goes directly into the task in planner, and we can see in notes that it's marked for Klynke. So we have a direct communication between the planner and the system. And we have also the documents, and we can save the documents directly in the repository. It's really saved in the SharePoint depository, and you can see the cover letter and CV that we have received from the actually email. And of course, we can go into the SharePoint if we want to view it there, and you can see that we have the same data, same documents in the system, and so we can go back and forth. We can edit things in either application, and Klynke will always capture everything together and make sure that whatever is belonging to the case will actually show up. So I will ask my colleague David to send an email into the system, and we will see how it pops up in here in the case list. So it takes only a few seconds. We are now getting the case. You can see it. The screen is updated, and we got the red icon here. We can see this is the newest case coming in. And so what really happens is that he just sent an email to the mail of the group. The group was actually indicating that it had received a new email, and we capture it and put it automatically into the SharePoint list, where we can then continue the team, the operation team here, to work on the cases. This is totally bundled with the teams, so we can create as many teams as we like, and we keep you could say, the thread of the communications always together, and all documents, tasks, etc., coming from different systems in Office 365. So if I go back to the slides now, we can just look at how this is done. And we have now on the left side, this is the case management system, where we actually start to init the webhook. And we put up our endpoint, the listen endpoint. And as soon as that is pinged by the graph, we start our services and go directly into our application. We have actually moved all the services into a specific DLL that we can distribute as a NuGet. So that is the yellow things here. So we can init the webhook that we call our service to init the webhooks. And really what we do there is that we go into the, as you all know, the client of the graph and subscription request, similar as you saw earlier in the presentation. What we have added to this is that we need to put subscription directly into cache. We use distributed cache to actually capture the subscription for each user. And when we are hit on the endpoint, we grab it again from the cache, take out we have registered it to the group conversation resource. And from the subscription, we grab the group ID and the conversation ID, where we then look up all the threads for this conversation, and then we can get to the posts and the attachments and everything that is belonging to the email, where we then call our group site and add to the SharePoint list this, and that becomes then part of, as we saw earlier, it pops up on the screen of the users. But at the same time, when we have actually taken this case and registered it to the system, we request the SignalR to notify the client. So we have here the SignalR part, that is the other core technology we use. So we have initiated the team. Each group has team has its own group, and we need to register that with SignalR, so we can communicate this event or this webhook to all the clients, where we actually call the teams. We send the request SignalR to notify the client, and we are shifting here between C# and JavaScript code. Depends on if we are on the SignalR hub or in the JavaScript client. So in the end, we write to the screen. So that covers the how we really are capturing the email automatically using webhooks and putting all together. And this way we can glue the overall solution of the SharePoint planner and Outlook in a holistic manner. So we have then the next part that I wanted to show you. That is how we use the system, the graph again, to register time on directly from Outlook events, or directly from the case or projects within the system to the SharePoint list, and how we can make sure that we can capture time and register the time. So this is then how we create directly from Outlook Calendar and Planner task using Microsoft Graph. So if we go back to the system, we have here the worker service. We can see here that this is the timesheet part of the solution. We were just in the case. This is time that we have been registering. Underneath, we can see all the Outlook calendar events, and you can see the marked one are already registered with the timesheet, the number of hours, etc. And we have then two here that have not been registered. And if we go to, let's say, other browser here to just see this calendar, you can see this is Outlook Office calendar. You can see that everything that Klynke has been registering is marked with the K. And you can see here the Simon call is not marked in Outlook. So if we go back to the system, we could register this call here. And you can see that we capture the time and minutes directly from the calendar. We can classify this and put it to another team or link it to a specific work like the planner task and etc. But if we just do it like this straight from Outlook, then we just register it. And now it is marked here. You can see call for Simon, and now seen here it's in the calendar. And if we go back to the Outlook, you can see we have now marked the Simon calendar immediately. If we go back to the system, and let's say we want to remove it again, we just edit this registration, and now we delete it from here. You can see it's gone, and if we go to Outlook, it's also gone. It's not marked anymore. So by this way, we can utilize the graph entirely to register time on events directly from Outlook, or we can also register it, of course, within the system. We can register tasks that are coming from elsewhere. So we can add to the day registration, and then we can just put the hours and minutes and on what team. In this case, we have only one team, and we can classify the work in a different way, billing code and etc. So that's how we have done it. And if we look at the code slides for this, then we have it like on the screen now. In the timesheet, we actually read from the Outlook calendar, from planner, from project, the SharePoint list and the case list. And as you can see here, we are also with everything in services in our NuGet packets, but underneath we call the graph client, the calendar view. As you know, this is a common thing in the SDK, the planner tasks and the main task that we have been looking at now. And this is how we register everything in the project and the team case. So we write to the Outlook calendar then this mark, so we can make sure that the user knows that he has already registered it or not. And in the SharePoint list, we again use SharePoint as a database. So we are not using any extra services like SQL Server or anything else. And that was the goal, to actually use Office 365 solely as it stands, just add value with the graph by adding common business services to the solution. So this actually covers our presentation of this solution. So if you have any questions or...
Yeah, that was great. I love the fact that it highlights a lot of the different connection points that Microsoft 365 provides and allows the user not only to be inside of your product, but also to continue to use Outlook and Planner and so forth in the way they're using it right now. Ben Summers is in our marketing team, was asking what were the things that you run into that were unexpected as you went through and did this? Like, what dev challenges did you have? It's great to see you wrapping things in NuGet packages and, shrink wrapping those, but were there other things that you did that you learned over time communicating with the graph?
Yes, the first thing that we had to overcome was that the fact that the webhooks is really meant for an interface update. But as we are working in the solution towards teams, we have all the teams to register the webhook, and then we did not decide to use Azure Functions or a REST server or anything else outside of the solution. So we have to create a complex identification of, so we are not duplicating the data that this was really already served. So that was one of the challenges that we had. So we capture the webhook, and then we had to create some mechanism to actually make sure that it was unique in the system, because otherwise everyone in the group were updating the same, because we are not only reading the data, we are writing the data also, but it needs to be unique. That was one of the things that we had to overcome. There are still things that we find strange in the graph. That was specifically when as we are working on the, you could say, conversation groups, working on email part, we had to forward messages between the groups and between conversation, and it seems to be that is still an open question for us, actually, to the graph team, really, that if we forward a message into a group conversation, it loses the body of the forwarded messages. So that is, but it keep all the attachment and everything, but the actual body itself is not there. So that is still an outstanding problem with the overall solution. But otherwise, it has been interesting to work with the graph. It has been a great experience. But then we had, there were a few things about latency and etc. We had to wait for the systems in many cases. Then we have to loop, you could say, and make sure that we waited enough time to get everything available, specifically in the beginning when we are configuring the solution, because we are self-configuring the solution for each tenant, so it's enough to log into the system and consent as an admin. Then we set up all the groups and planner and etc. And then we had some problem with latency, and we had to wait for some time, but we have overcome this by actually doing some looping and etc. To solve that.
And so I wondered that with the Signal R in terms of the webhooks, because they aren't defined with an SLA inside the system, and depending on the workloads, there certainly are times where the webhooks don't come through kind of instantaneously. And so it's interesting if your users give you that feedback with regards to, them doing something and not seeing the webhook pop with the Signal R straight away. Pallav Sharma also mentioned, do you use graph batch calls, and
No.
how have you mitigated with like kind of throttling? Is your system hitting any throttling issues?
Yeah, we have not had any throttling issues. What we have done is that we capture the token immediately. We are using MSAL for the token service, and we then capture the token as soon as we can, and make sure that we don't request too often to the graph. But when we need to wait, then we just request. And if we get an error back, we wait and we request again. So we are really managing all the calls to different services by ourselves. So we are not using batches or that part of it. We have not tried it out.
Well, look, I really appreciate your time today, Esgrimar. Thank you. I want to jump to Apitha to talk a bit more about the deprecation. So again, just thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll make sure there's people asking for the slides in the deck, so I will definitely make sure that these are included in the community call slide deck that we put out with the recording later in the week. So thank you again for contributing, and if other partners would like to share what they've been doing with the graph, and I love the fact that you can show it via a working product. They're super useful to understand the context and not just jump straight into here are the calls. So thank you for demoing and showing the APIs in that way.
Okay, thanks.
So Apitha, I'm hoping that we've managed to iron out the audio issues.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's way clearer. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I'm going to hand it straight back to you. So thank you, Esgrimar. I appreciate that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Again, apologies, everyone. I'm just starting to share my screen back. Hopefully you can see that and are able to hear me well. Because we have only a few more minutes left on this call, I was just thinking what's the best way to capture this. I hopefully shared the essence of what we are trying to put together as a proposal for versioning and API evolution within Graph. And the two key things for this entire group to take away is, what are the best developer experiences that Microsoft can invest in such that you are, like I said, you're getting the right best developer experience to ensure that your business is continuing, but at the same time, you're able to grasp or capture the changes being made to enhance the applications being developed. Some of the changes I talked about, which is what we presented to different forums before, like the SDK experiences, header responses, Graph Explorer, And then the documents, basically the changelog API reference documents and blog posts, community calls, etc. These are some of the things that we shared. And I also received a very good feedback from community, both on the Azure side as well as the M365 side, on ideas floated around for, hey, why don't you consider this option, that option? And I've captured those options and putting it in here. For one, like Jeremy mentioned, I'll share this deck out, so you'll have some time to go through this, absorb, and see if you have any feedback to share. But then since we have only 2 more minutes, instead of going deep into this, please type in your questions in the chat if you have any feedback, inputs, or would like to have a discussion further. So happy to set up something else. But this is one thing is, since this has been going on for almost 2 months in terms of proposal, and I've received good feedback on this, we are looking forward to moving very fast on this. And we'll also be discussing this during the remote MVP summit that's going to happen in mid-March. So there's also another opportunity for discussion and feedback. I pause here. Please feel free to type in the chat, or if required, we could have another discussion around this.
Yeah, I think what we might do is we'll share these slides with people, and then in the April community call, we can get you back with collate a bunch of questions. If we can use the Microsoft Graph hashtag with the hashtag deprecation, and then that way we'll be able to collect the questions together, and then we can have you presenting back our Pither in the April call. This is really important to us as a team. Pither's been driving this, and there's been obviously a lot of internal discussion, and you can imagine the opinions that we all have, which Pither's done a great job of collating and trying to get one agreement across all the different API review councils and the various different divisions of the company that want to have an opinion on the strategy here. We do, but we also want to hear from you as well. And so what we'll do is we'll share these slides with this recording, and then we will basically encourage you guys to comment in the blog post, because we are able to add comments now in the blog posts, and then we'll get Pither back on in the April call to discuss this further, and obviously answer any of your questions in the blog comments as well.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Excellent. Well, we're bang on an hour. So thank you so much again for Vincent Pither and Asgrimmer for presenting today. And if people are interested in contributing and presenting in the community call, please let me know. We obviously, as you can see, we're interested in what you're doing in an open source perspective, but we're also love to see what partners are doing, because I think that really does show the value of the graph in terms of the breadth of the APIs across the Microsoft 365 surface and the power of what you can do with that. So we'll see you next month in the April call, and it's April 7th at 8 a.m. And there are plenty of other calls that are available where you can see other community calls on our Microsoft 365 developer YouTube channel. And so it's aka.ms M365 Dev YouTube. You can subscribe to that channel, and every single community call is recorded and published there. As I say, ours is on April 7th. And you can see that we don't just have Microsoft Graph and SharePoint calls, which I know you're very familiar with on with the people I can see in the lists, but there are Power Apps community calls and Office add-ins community calls and the Microsoft Teams community call and identity and adaptive cards. So there's a lot of content we're sharing with you all on a monthly basis. So, if you've got things you're building that map to these things, we'd love to hear from you to make sure that we can have the community presenting back and not just having the PG present to you. So a big thank you for everyone for attending, and we should be able to get this recording out by the end of the week with the slide decks, and we encourage you to communicate there on the blog post. So thanks again, folks, and see you in April.